Lions bred in captivity, raised to be hunted, destined to be someone's trophy. Captive bred hunting is big business in South Africa. Between 6,000 and 8,000 lions are raised in captivity in around 200 ranches across the country. And every year, around 800 are placed in private game reserves for hunters who have paid big money to kill them. Opponents say captive bred hunting is cruel and inhumane. The lions are tame and sometimes even drugged, making it an unfair chase. Big game hunting is a sport for the rich elite. Hunters pay tens of thousands of dollars for these trophies. According to the International Fund for Animal Welfare, between 2004 and 2014, 1.7 million animals were killed for their trophy, and at least 200,000 of them were from threatened species. Trophy hunting is a lucrative business. This is the going market rate for the big five hunts in South Africa. For lions, a hunt can cost between $8,500 and $50,000. Captive bred hunting is cheaper, with hunters paying up to $20,000 to shoot a big male. The US is the biggest importer of hunting trophies, and South Africa the biggest exporter, with lions by far the most traded. In 2013, close to 90% of imported trophies to the US were from lions bred and hunted in captivity in South Africa. But the tide on this practice is beginning to turn. The US Fish and Wildlife Service has now declared African and Indian lions are threatened or endangered, meaning importing hunting trophies, including from captive bred lions, will be much more difficult. For those in favour, captive bred hunting is an opportunity to help preserve species. In South Africa, there are only around 2,300 wild lions living in protected areas. Supporters argue captive bred hunting takes the strain off the wild population, and managed breeding strengthens the gene pool. It's also argued this practice has a knock-on effect for conservation, helping to preserve the habitat for wild lions too. Is captive bred lion hunting a way to protect the dwindling numbers of lions in Africa? Is it about conservation and responsible hunting? Or is it barbaric and unethical? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Johannesburg is Stephen Palos, who's Chief Executive of the Confederation of Hunting Associations of South Africa, and Jeff Flocken, the North American Regional Director of the International Fund for Animal Welfare. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Jeff Flocken, let me start with you. Canned hunting, is it ethical?
Most hunters don't even believe this is ethical. Surveys found of hunters who hunt non-sport or hunting for substance find canned hunting to be appalling for the most part.
Stephen Palos, Jeff says it's appalling for the most part, and even many seasoned hunters find canned hunting appalling for the most part. What do you think?
Yes, I would suggest that most hunters do find the concept that has been termed canned hunting. We prefer as hunters to say the canned shooting or canned killing of lion is indeed appalling. And this is practitioners who would literally catch the unaware potential client and lead him to believe he was on a fair chase hunt, and where that animal was raised in a manner that it was habituated to people. The hunt might be happening on a very small property. In some instances, in past, I do believe these practices have been stamped out in recent times. The animal may even still be under the effects of the narcotic drugs used to move them from wherever they may have been living prior to the hunt. And they haven't habitualized themselves, and there isn't a hunter on earth that thinks that shooting, hunter worthy of the name hunter that is, that thinks that shooting something like that is by any means a hunt. It's not a hunt. It's not what we do.
Okay, and it's interesting, Stephen, that in South Africa, canned lion hunting is illegal, but captive bred lion hunting is allowed, and there seems to be some sort of legal and ethical contradiction and some sort of fine line here. Help me understand that a bit, Stephen.
I think the difficulty comes in the conceptualizing of our wildlife in South Africa in particular, being for the most part on private-owned land, ranch land. People that have chosen to ranch or farm with wildlife as an alternative to your classic domestic stock. This has happened for all of our species over the years. Over the past 40 decades, it's been an incredible successful story for South Africa. It has returned more than 20 million hectares of land to wildlife estate in that period. It has raised our wild animal count from somewhere in the low 500,000s in the 1960s to figures approaching 16 million today, and across a whole range of species found in our country. It saved many species from the brink as well, and hunting has been the underpinning economy of this particular activity, with more than 70% of the direct revenue coming to these operations coming from the hunting fraternity. Mostly in the South African context, local hunters who hunt mostly for the meat, but a critical element thereof is the international trophy hunter, who adds a lot of extra profitability to the enterprise and gives that cherry on the top to the viability.
Okay, and this is where
Let me just a relatively modern, a modern evolution of that has been the lion coming into the mix.
Okay, the lion's come into the mix.
The lion has come into the mix.
Okay, I want to bring Jeff in because this is where I think the two of you would disagree. Sorry for interrupting you, Stephen. So you both agreed that the sort of canned hunting is a problem and it's appalling and unethical and all of that. But when we get to the more sort of generic and broadly speaking trophy hunting, Jeff, you would disagree with Stephen. Tell us why.
Well, it's not so much even me. It's society is against trophy hunting, particularly of endangered species. We know this when we poll on the issue globally. Typically anywhere between 80 to 90% are against killing particularly endangered species for sport. It's an activity which no longer has a place in the modern day. As was pointed out by Stephen, in fact, there is some money that does go back to local communities from this. And the struggle we're going to have as this industry continues to die out, because we've evolved beyond needing to kill things for sport, what will you do to replace that income? What non-lethal way can we work with communities to make sure that they have livelihoods and are able to, in some ways, profit from the wildlife around them, such as ecotourism where it's appropriate, and other ways that bring revenue back into those communities?
Okay, so Stephen...
We have to understand that it is sometimes a burden to live next to wildlife.
Sure, okay, so let's bring in Stephen. Stephen, to address that question, should we be hunting for sport in the year 2016? Is there a place for this in the year 2016 when we can all go to the supermarket, or most of us with the means can go to the supermarket and get our food from the supermarket? We shouldn't be doing this stuff for sport. Stephen?
Absolutely. It's a human instinctive activity. It is right up there. It's an imperative within the human instinct. It's not in everybody anymore. I hear Jeff's numbers regarding society, but I can pretty much guarantee that the society he speaks of and measures those percentages of is not the world cross-section of humanity, but largely Western or highly developed societies that take those views because they've been removed for a couple of generations from being close to the earth. Which makes it, to me, you see, it's a little bit
disingenuous. The majority of the demand is actually being driven by those same Western societies. The U.S. is in fact responsible for 71% of imports coming in from other countries of imperiled species that are being killed for sport. So the U.S. in fact is important to know that that's coming from a very small sector of that society, a very privileged, typically elder white men who are engaging in this sport, whereas by far the vast majority of these same community is very much against it. And with an animal like the lion, it has a ripple effect. It does impact conservation. Studies have shown that where hunting has intensively happened in lion prides, these same populations have intensively dropped. If it in fact were sustainable, that wouldn't be the case, because there's a cascading effect in these large carnivores like lions that live in a pride. When you kill the dominant male, that in fact destabilizes the whole pride and puts other animals within that pride at risk. You're seeing a ripple effect where multiple animals are dying as a result. And lions are in trouble globally. There's been a 60% decline in lion populations over the last 3 decades. They do not need to be hunted for sport anymore. This is just not appropriate. The majority of the reason they're being killed is due to conflict and loss of habitat. But we know that hunting is in fact unsustainable hunting is one of the reasons that they are declining in the wild. So that is an easy one to address.
Right, okay.
This animal should not be killed
okay.
for sport.
So let's get Stephen to respond.
It should not be hung
sure.
as a trophy.
Thanks, Jeff. Let's get Stephen to respond to that. So,
Yes.
so Stephen,
Yes.
Jeff's making the point that you're saying the criticism is only coming from sort of elitist circles. He's saying the criticism and the demand is coming from the same places. Stephen?
Well, where hunting is happening in southern Africa, where relative stable governments and relatively good governance exists, the public and the populations that live with wildlife are quite happy with it. Where there is unhappiness is in countries such as Kenya, where in actual fact hunting was banned in 1977. Populations of wildlife have plunged more than 60%. The benefit of the ecotourism only goes to the iconic places. People don't understand the vastness of Africa and how much land is out there that really does not suit the so-called photographics or non-consumptive tourists. Not to say that they don't have a very severe footprint either, by the way. There's a lot of evidence to show that, for example, they're starting to disrupt wildebeest migrations in the Masai Mara area by actually crowding the exit paths of rivers. So there's no one perfect solution. But what I come back to is our solution in Southern Africa, and in particular in the South African context, where our actual numbers of animals have shown that the hunting has been the restoration of vast numbers and includes incredibly endangered animals. Numbers that were down as low as 30 individuals of a species in the 1960s, up in the thousands today.
That's a strong
point.
As
a result
sure,
of hunting.
that's a
but
strong
it's
point.
regulated and it's managed.
Let me ask Jeff. Jeff, before we reach your sort of ideal situation or your perfect society, as Stephen puts it, if somebody can empirically prove to you that the money raised from the sale of hunting permits, for example, is used for conservation, would you be happy with that as a short-term compromise until you can reach a better solution?
There have been many horrific practices throughout history that have been justified for economic benefits. Hunting endangered species for sport is no longer socially or morally accepted. We need to find a new way to replace that income where it's needed to make sure those lands that have been set aside for hunting are still set aside for conservation. The fact of the matter is, though, that it is not appropriate just because it makes money to say that killing these animals for sport is still something that can be accepted. It undermines conservation. It undermines the moral fiber that most people now believe this should not be part of it.
Jeff, what do you want the South African government, for example, to do right now?
Well, I think we need to look at certain endangered species. In particular, I'm very concerned on the demand side. In these countries like the United States, that is providing most of the demand for these endangered species to be hunted and hung as trophies, we need to start banning the import of ones that are not appropriate to be killing. And that I include elephants, rhinos, lions, and species that are in serious decline and haven't even been listed yet on an endangered species list, like giraffes and hippos. We know these animals are endangered. They do not need another threat at this time, in addition to the other problems that are plaguing them.
Okay, final response from Stephen, because we're running out of time. Stephen, in less than 30 seconds, please.
Well, it's a totally crazy notion that he's basically saying that our governments in Southern Africa don't have the maturity or the good sense to decide what their sustainable quotas are, so they will enforce it upon us. That's a neo-colonialist approach. We don't like what you people are doing, so we're going to simply ban your product. If this were in reverse, we would be in such trouble with the US government at the moment, if we were banning a US product just because of our sensitivities. I think Jeff should spend a little bit more time on the ground in Africa. If he's coming out to CITES, I welcome him to look me up, and I will definitely have a proper conversation with him then and show him a few successes on the ground and show him what the potential of this particular activity still is in this continent and the difference it is and will make in the future.
Okay, Jeff, are you going to meet up with Stephen at the CITES conference?
Thank you, Steve. I'll probably see him there. I actually studied wildlife management in Africa. I'm very familiar with the situation on the ground, but I look forward to meeting him.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hopefully something fruitful can come out of it. Stephen and Jeff, thanks so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure.